This is a lesson on shadows in the landscape. It's a big lesson, and it's a big lesson because it's a subject I'm passionate about. First of all, once you're done, you're never going to look at the world through the same eyes again. Vision is going to be a lot richer in experience for you. Second of all, we're going to study the most interesting subject there is, your own mind. Because just like color, shadows don't exist in nature. Light exists in nature. But shadows, the absence of it, is a mental construct. Take a look at this incredibly detailed drawing of an albino giraffe in the snow on a cloudy day. Notice how you can see every hair. No? Well, maybe that's because it's a cloudy day. Let's try the exact same scene on a sunny day. As an element of a painting, shape is very important to us. It tells us what a painting is about. And as you can see, shadow and shadow alone can usually do a good job of defining shape. Not only does it tell us the shape, but it tells us the curvature of that shape. Notice that you can't see the back of the giraffe at all, but that doesn't matter. We know it's a giraffe. Notice, too, the shadow of the giraffe on the ground. Look how beautifully it simply anchors it to the world. In order to understand shadows, we're going to need to understand the light source that created them. Let's take a look at the sky. Here, this is the sky. It's like a planetarium. We're looking straight up at the middle of it, and this would be the horizon around the outside. It's a sunny day. There's not a cloud in sight. The only thing pretty much that we do see is the blue sky and the sun. The sun's pretty small. It's probably about this big in relationship to the whole thing. The rest of the sky is blue, and it's actually a light source. So even though the sky is relatively weak as a light source, it's huge in comparison to the sun. And in fact, it emits almost as much light as the sun does overall. Here's a sketch of a building and its shadow. The sun is over my left shoulder, which means to my left and behind me, so that what's illuminated here is this piece of roof and this wall. This wall is in full shadow, and of course there's a shadow being cast on the ground. There's four areas of interest. There's the downward facing edge of this roof. There's the shadow cast by the overhanging roof here. There's this wall that's in shadow, and there is the cast shadow. I want to start with this one. This is a downward facing surface, so there's no possibility that it's either illuminated by skylight or sunlight. Any light that gets under there has to bounce off of other things. Now, if we were standing there, we'd have enough light to look under there and see what that construction was, for example. So there is enough light, there is light bouncing primarily off the ground that is illuminating this under here. What that tells us is that the color of this area here is primarily the color of the ground. So if this were a green grass ground, the color under here would have a strong green component to it. It would all be very dark, so you wouldn't see too much of it, but it would be there. Let's move on to this shadow here. It is illuminated by a certain amount of skylight, light coming in from the horizon. So this shadow would be considerably brighter than this shadow, but still a very dark shadow. And what color light is illuminating that shadow? Blue light. Now we have a clue as to what the color is here. Moving on to this side here, which is in full shadow, let's take a look at its source of light. It's getting a little bit of skylight from up here, but this skylight is very glancing light and not affecting it very strongly. But as we get more and more over this direction, we get more and more direct illumination. We have a nice blue skylight shining on this whole edge, which stops here, of course, because that's the horizon. Now let's take a look at the cast shadow. That thing sees a much bigger piece of sky than this thing. The cast shadow sees a little bit of incidental light here, But by this point, it's getting some pretty good light. By this point, it's getting a huge amount of straight-on light, and it continues to get light for a considerable ways over here, depending on where in the shadow it is and how much of the building is blocked. That means that this shadow here is a whole lot darker than this shadow here. Typically, 50%. Whatever this is twice as bright. Does that mean you have to paint it that way? No. But it's a good idea to know the rules so that if you break them, you're knowing what rule it is you're breaking. Now let's talk about the color. If this were a white house, the color of this side would be blue. Yes, I know there would be a little teeny bit of bouncing light from here, there, and the other place, but there's no sunlight, and there's a huge amount of blue light. This is blue. Your brain isn't telling you it's blue. Your brain is telling you it's gray. And that's where things start to get really, really, really interesting. There's a whole lot of light entering your eyes, and that's all it is light. Your lens focuses on your retina, and your retina passes this information along to the brain, and very first time an image is constructed is in your head. That image is constructed based upon what your brain thinks you're seeing, not about what you're seeing. Right now, we got two little jobs before we start. One is to discuss the outline of this shadow. I've purposely drawn it fuzzy, and the reason is that the sun is a disk. If it were a point source, this edge would be sharp. But because the sun is a disk, this edge fades out. If you paint it as a straight line, you will absolutely get away with it. But I'd hate for you to be painting and suddenly find yourself with a paper drawing not knowing what to do because you didn't understand about this. There's definitely a fuzzy edge to cast shadows in the landscape. We're almost at the point of starting to paint. But first, let me show you this picture here. There was a time when I understood intellectually what I'm telling you now, but I had never actually seen the blue. I'd never seen the blue shadows. The shadows that I saw outdoors were just darker versions of what they would have been if they'd been in sunlight. One day, under benefit of daiquiri, sitting around a friend's house, I watched one side of his house turn from white to blue, and frankly, my reaction was, oh my God. It was as if the world changed, and in fact it had. I have never ever not seen that blue again. It has changed the richness of my vision, and I clearly know how to express the joy of a bright sunny day when painting a painting. It's easy. This isn't a very good painting. I was a pretty raw amateur when I did it, but I put it into an art show. It was my very first art show, and I had no hope of doing anything but actually making it into the show if I was lucky. You give them your money, and maybe they show your piece, and maybe they reject it. But I was thrilled. I got it into the show, and actually I got second prize. That really blew me away because this was a big show with a lot of competition. The judge, when she described why she gave out the prizes, referred to unapologetically blue shadows. So there you have it. I think it's time to go paint. I have my quarter sheet of watercolor paper clipped to my plastic board. It's clipped at the bottom, and I plan to leave those clips there because I'm going to trim some of the bottom off. I've drawn a barn and a silo. I've got my half-inch brush and my 1-inch brush standing by, and of course I have some paper towel, and I'm ready to go. Because it's easier, I'm going to turn this so that the sky's facing me. I'm putting in a roll of masking tape over here just so that I'll have a tilt. This way, because I'm not painting wet and wet, if there's a pool forms, it'll run off towards me instead of making funny shapes on the paper. I'm going to start with a non-sedimentary blue, a staining blue color. I need quite a bit of sky, but I'm not trying for a dark sky. I'm trying just to tell people that a sky is there. I'm going to get a little more and quite a bit more water. That should do it. Now here I go. I'm shaking a little bit here, so I'm going to go slow. And right up to the edge there. Okay, that's good. Might as well paint to the edge of the paper. I'm going to paint around the cap of the silo. I'm going to make sure that I've got the top painted. I'm going to paint this side, which is not nearly as critical because that's going to have a shadow anyway. I wasn't certain I'm going to have enough paint, so I'm just going to add a little more here. Good, I'm right up to the roof. Over here, it's not particularly critical because this side's going to be in shadow anyway. Missed a little spot there, but we don't care about that because that's going to be, I don't know why this thing is here. Do you see that? I don't like that at all. But before anything dries, let's get rid of it. There's another one here. That'll do it. I'm just going to let this completely dry now. I'm switching to my 1/2 inch flat, and I'm going to also switch blues to a more purplish blue away from a greenish blue. In this case, ultramarine, and this is nice because it's a little sedimentary. That'll help me because if I slip, it'll lift a little bit. And it's taking some burnt sienna, some sedimentary red. Got to get enough of it. And I'm going to mix a, let's call it a dark. Let's not call it a black, but that's pretty close to black. It's blue black, and that's, I'm happy with that. I'm going to take a little bit, thin it, and use that to paint the roof of the barn and the silo. This could be a black roof, or it could be a gray roof. Not a white roof. By the way, there are white barns. You know where you find them? You find them in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Dutch country. I've seen plenty of white barns. I guess they just paint their barns white. Okay. I'm going to take some strong color of the same stuff, and I'm going to make the shadow on the cap here, which would come about like, let's say, this, and might just, wouldn't be on top here, soften out that way, and just be round. Okay, I'll put a shadow under there, but not yet. I'm not ready for that. What I'm ready for is to now make a very bluish version of this same shadow. And while I've got this, let's paint the side of the house in shadow. It's going to be darker than what I just did. Remember that the object that casts the shadow is darker than the shadow it casts. So if there was a cast shadow from here, it won't be, but if there was, we would need to have this dark enough to cast that shadow. Coming down here to the bottom, I want the edge of the shadow to be somewhat raggedy. That's so that I can have a nice raggedy hillside there. That's it. And we need to let that dry for a while. I can, while I'm doing this, do the shadow on the silo here. Let me get my head in there. I'm sorry. Also raggedy down at the bottom there. Pretty straight. Whatever I do, I want that a stripe of uniform width here. And then I'm just going to take a clean brush, clean water. You didn't see it. There's some extra water off screen. And I'm going to soften this edge. Don't take too much time here. You want to soften that edge. And if it dries too much, it will be very, very difficult. Pretty dry brush. Just soften this edge here, which I can do easily because it's a sedimentary color, telling us that the thing is not a rectangular thing, but a cylindrical, a rounded thing. Now I need to let it dry. I've used a hairdryer and dried it up. I'm just going to make a little more dark here, and I'm going to make it thick and pasty because I want a really dark blue shadow. But I now want it on the blue side. Okay, there we go. That's a blue shadow, but a dark blue shadow. Maybe a little more dark. There you go. Nope, still blue. There you go. It's still blue, but it's quite dark. And I'm going to put the darkest dark shadow we have. I'm going to put it right over here. Boy, does that stand out immediately. It's really important that I get this little thing right here right. It looks funny to me. Better? use slightly bluer stuff for the cast shadow, the shadow cast on the side by the roof overhang. Well, I should, let's just get an edge on this and just call it. Say we're seeing the edge of the roof there, and the shadow in here would be similar to the shadow below the overhang. So I'll just paint that in with the same brush. Okay. This is a downward facing shadow. I'm just using the same dark under the cap of the silo here. And that's good. We have the barn and silo are complete. I'm going to use what I've got here to make a green for my trees. Some yellow. Sedimentary yellow. Some of the blue here. I can use some of this dark up too, because I want my trees to be dark. I don't want any suggestion that these are I don't know, I want them to be a foil for this light edge, is the function of these trees. So I'll just start by putting in this edge. And now I'll just put in the rest of the trees here by putting in top of the tree over here and another tree here. I'm pushing the brush for the top of the trees, and that should do it for me. That's good. Now I need some distant, far more distant trees. I'll use the exact same thing, add a little of this blue to it, but make it much thinner. And I'll push these trees over here back. I want this tree line here just to represent the fact that the world doesn't drop off at the edge of that hill, that there's something back here, and it'll create a center of interest right across the painting, everything connected, and that's good composition. That's all I need. I want to let this dry, and we'll just do the foreground. Everything's dry. I'm going back to my big brush, and I'm going to get a lot of paint over here, a lot of paint. Some of this. I'll use my knife so I'm not sticking wet paint into the okay, there's a green. It's a very yellow green. That's not bad. I'm going to add some sedimentary green to this. Green it up quite a bit more. It's not a very strong color. I can add a good amount. There we go. That's green. It's very realistic green. It's not a bright garish green. We can always add that a little bit later. And let's start painting this in. Now on the top, it's going to be the sunniest, so let's take some yellow and let's push it up into here. That's why I left this edge ragged, so that it would look right when I push this. You know what I mean? Just using the corner of the brush and pushing a little will give it that vegetation look. Okay. I might want this to run down. I'm going to put my tape back under there. Let's keep painting. Now this is going to work as long as I do unusual, well, as long as I do horizontal strokes with tons of water and sedimentary paint. And then when I'm done, leave it alone. There's nothing can go wrong here. If I throw a lot of water in and the water propels a bloom of, like here, it's going upward, that's fine. If I want to throw some little bit of green in here, that's fine. See, there's not much you can do wrong. Just try to keep it horizontal and leave it alone. You know, once you're done, leave it alone. That seems the biggest key in watercolor painting is once you're done, leave it alone. We're not going to use the bottom of the paper, so I'm not going to worry about it. If you start throwing vertical stuff in here, then you have to define what the vertical stuff is. But if it's horizontal like this, it's just growy stuff, and that's fine. You can throw in some additional color here and there if you like. A little strong, but there you go. And now, for better or for worse, I'm not about to touch this again until it's dry. I've taken that roll of tape out from under the painting. So it's laying flat, but I want to show you we're almost dry. Can you see this little bit of shininess here that's reflecting the studio light? So we're not dead dry yet, but the paper is substantially drier. I'm loosening this clip and just pushing the paper down at the bottom here, so if it wants to go flat, it can, and then I'm replacing the clip. I'm going back to my 1-inch brush. I'm going back to my bluish green. And we've got plenty of local color here. We've got the color of this field of whatever it is. And that's the color of the thing is the local color. Like fire engines are red and dandelion flowers are yellow. The local color is what it is. I'm going to take some of my non-sedimentary, my staining blue. I can keep adding to it. I don't need a tremendous amount of water here because where's the water? The water's in the paper. So I'm going to keep my paint here. It's definitely watery, but it's not easy to drip. It's, oh, I don't know what to describe it, but it's neither thin nor pasty. And I'm going to start adding a shadow in here, a foreground shadow. The shadows in the, by the way, the reason I want it wet is that the edges will be slightly diffuse, and that'll be a good thing. Now, foreground tree shadows, and that's what we're having here is a tree shadow. Tree shadows are going to be pretty dense toward the tree, but as you get away from the tree, they're going to become, I'm trying to suggest leaves and irregularities at the end here. As you get away from the tree, you're going to start to get some holes in the shadow. I'm painting it very dark here, quite on purpose. I'm painting it very blue here, quite on purpose. The holes will be relatively small. You're not going to get big tree holes, but you're going to get tree holes. Sky holes, shadow holes. Heard them called all kinds of things, but they're dappling. And not too many of them either. You get many more holes in the tree than in the shadow. But I want the shadow going all the way across, and I think I want it going out. I want a bigger shadow than this. I want us to be well deeply inside the shadow of the tree. I want this tree to be shading us. Foreground shadows are one of the really great tricks available to landscape painters. They do things. They put buildings and trees alongside us, and they provide us with a sense of shade and sanctuary. They're great compositional elements. They deal with a foreground, which can sometimes be a little difficult to deal with, and they often make us feel good. They provide the blue that we need to understand that it's a sunny day, it's sunny shadows, and we're feeling good. I'm going to take a little time now with the corner of my brush to actually suggest irregular edges out here. Give it that realistic look. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort to do that. Okay, now we're in the shadow. What a difference this makes. Am I right? The shadow is denser and darker over here. And now I want another shadow from another tree. And this time, it's a little further away, so it's not going to be as dark. Contrast is going to get reduced, but it's not a lot farther away, so let's put it over here. Two trees are close together, but they're not touching. Neither are the shadows. I just realized something. I forgot to throw the shadow of the silo on the barn. I'm going to give you a fast forward of that just because that shadow painting is just more of what we've done before. So what happened here is I started with the wrong blue, and I had a dickens of a time hitting the right color. And finally, I'm blotting up some of the wet paint on the side of the barn in order to get it to the same value as the end of the barn. That's it. Shadows in the landscape.